Across the United States, we've seen new bills being signed into law that bar biological males from competing against women. Notably, in Florida, Ron DeSantis signed this bill. He's now being sued over it. The Human Rights Campaign, a nonprofit, is filing a lawsuit. In Ohio, Democrats, in a very bizarre fashion, began screaming and banging on their tables so loud you could barely hear what was happening. Why? Because a Republican introduced an amendment that would bar biological males from competing against biological females. It's that simple. Now, the conversation around trans people in sports is a very complicated conversation. There's a lot of questions that get brought up that I think are legitimate coming from the left, but there's a lot of things the left ignores when it comes to biology and competition and the purpose of competition. The first thing I'll say is this political behavior, Democrats just screaming and yelling. I saw this and I'm like, I don't care what the bill is. What is wrong with you? And when you see this screaming, makes me wonder how far away it is until someone starts caning the other person. No, you may know the story of a congressman caning another congressman just before the Civil War. I'm not trying to get too much into that, but the point is, I mean, this is unhinged. Just banging and slamming. Like, what are you doing? Are we in kindergarten? And this is like an old white dude. It's very strange behavior. We need to have a conversation around transgender individuals in sports, and we have these bills passing, so it's very important we actually get to the root of the arguments and talk about them. And for that, I want to say one thing before we start. I'm not trying to disparage or disrespect anybody. I'll try and be as respectful as possible when talking about trans people in sports, but I think that there is a very real discrepancy in the conversation around transgender athletes in sports. We typically only ever hear of bills barring biological males from competing against biological females, but not the other way around. I mean, this in and of itself is a very serious problem. In major league sports, women, biological females are allowed to compete, but for some reason they don't. It could be very simple. These are people who aren't the best of the best. So if you have an open league where literally male or female, anybody can compete, and it's typically just like tall, strong men, well, there's a biological component to competition, and you can't change these things. Now, I want to read you the story about what's happening with Ohio, but we're going to get into some issues pertaining trans men. These are people born biologically female and then competing against females. In one instance, an athlete was forced to do it. Mac Beggs, you may know the story. And conservatives thought this was someone who was male competing against females. No, this is a trans man who did not want to wrestle biological females, but had to because many of these laws that get passed don't understand. It's a one-way street, essentially. If a trans man wants to compete against biological males, then it's actually just a disadvantage for the trans man. But if a trans man competes against biological females and they're taking testosterone, it's a disadvantage for the biological females. I shouldn't say what you can't do, but I'll just say it does get complicated. The other component of this is it appears that there is a trans individual born female knowing they were trans. I don't know if this person was taking hormones, but choosing, instead of coming out and saying it, to compete against biological females. And this is a bit more complicated, but this is the component of the conversation that's being missed in this. When the Republicans in Ohio are coming out and saying biological males against females, and the Democrats all start screaming, there's another half to this conversation that needs to be had that creates a very serious conundrum for a lot of these laws and what we should do in terms of sporting events. But I'll tell you what. One of these individuals I'm going to be talking about is a skateboarder. And I certainly think it is, we are entering a world where people just want to, there's no competition. You know, if you want to play basketball, do you identify as being tall? Well, no, if you're tall and strong and athletic, you can be the best. Michael Phelps has long arms, I guess, so he's a good swimmer. But we're entering this world where you literally can identify as a world's best, and that's what's starting to happen. And I'm not kidding. So I could just say this. Look, I've never had a vision of myself as the best skateboarder in the world. When I was younger, I didn't envision a future where I was on the top podium at the X Games, and I never pushed myself all that hard to be the best skateboarder in the world. I just liked skateboarding. But what if there's somebody who truly believes they are the best, that to be themselves, they must be one of the best skateboarders in the world? And another component of that is their gender identity. So they decide that it makes sense for them to compete against women when they're biologically male, and then they end up just winning a lot. This actually doesn't happen all that often. I think conservatives bring up a lot of stories where they're saying it does happen, and the left does have a good argument. It doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, it's substantive. And there's very serious philosophical arguments about why we shouldn't do this. I don't have all the answers. Let me just read you the news, and then I'm going to go through some actual athletes where we have this conundrum. Fox News reports, chaos erupted on the Ohio House floor when a Republican proposed an amendment that would ban transgender women from participating in women's sports. Now, first of all, Fox News said transgender females. Fox, fix your headline. Someone who is transgender is an individual who doesn't identify with a gender they were assigned at birth. That's what they say. If they are female, meaning they have ovaries, and they are transgender, they would be a trans man. The bill does not ban that. Anyway, I digress. I know it's confusing for a lot of people. They say Rep. Jenna Powell had proposed the addition to a bill that would allow college athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness in the state. The bill itself passed the Ohio House 57-36 and will now be sent back to the Senate to vote on the amended legislation. It is crucial to preserving the integrity of women's rights and women's and girls' sports, Powell said, over the din of the Democratic outcry. Unfair, yelled Democratic Rep. Michael Skindell. The bill would prohibit transgender females, no, that's wrong, from participating in girls' sports on both the high school and college level, instead requiring them to join male or co-ed teams. Schools that violate the rule would face civil lawsuits. They are not talking about females trying to compete against males. This is incorrect language. You don't transition between male or female. The idea is transitioning from man to woman, although to be fair, they've definitely changed the definitions over time. Lawmakers also voted to remove the emergency clause, which would have allowed the bill to take effect immediately upon passing the Senate. Ohio, if the bill is ultimately signed, would join Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, New Mexico, and Texas to become the seventh state to pass name, image, and likeness legislation, set to begin on July 1st. Ohio's bill is no longer on track to take effect that day with the amendment. This is about making transgender people the other, said Rep. Casey Weinstein, Democrat from Hudson, of the amendment, according to Buckeye Extra. Like many of you, I have fought for women's equality all my life, and now I am continuing to fight for it today, said Rep. Jean Schmidt, R. Loveland, who argued that menstruation hampered female athletes. If you have a daughter, you should believe in this, said Rep. Sarah Carruthers, R. of Hamilton. In March 2020, Idaho became the first state to ban transgender women from girls' sports this year alone. Governors from Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Montana, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Florida all signed legislation similar to the transgender ban that was taken up in Ohio. Now, the video, I might add, is just absolutely bonkers. Let me just play it. Prepare your ears, I suppose. Here we go.
Achieve their dreams and athletics in our state, and is crucial to preserving women's rights and the integrity of women's and girls' sports. Across our country, female athletes are currently losing scholarships, opportunities, medals, education, and training opportunities. This amendment will require schools that are part of the OHSAA to designate separate teams for participants of the biological sex. No school interscholastic conference or organization that regulates interscholastics shall permit biological males to participate on athletic team or an athletic competition designated only for biological female participants.
This is insane. The screaming and the pounding. And the bill only targets biological males wanting to compete against biological females. All right, let's get into all of these arguments. And I have a lot to say on this because we did talk. I've had a lot of arguments with a lot of leftists. And this one, I mean, that is just insane. These people screaming, shut up, calm down. You lost. Present your arguments. These people, this is not how politics is supposed to be in this country. And I want to stress, I am in no way intending to disparage any of these people. In fact, I'll be defending them to a certain degree. The first thing I want to start with is Mac Beggs. Mac Beggs is a high school wrestler. Mac Beggs was born female. started taking testosterone to transition to male, but because of some of these laws was not allowed to compete against males. It doesn't make sense for someone who's taking testosterone supplements and born female to wrestle against females. Many conservatives were on the wrong side of this one because they saw this photo of someone who looked very masculine putting someone who looked very feminine in a headlock. And they said, this is just wrong because they assumed Mac Beggs was born male. Not correct. This is an instance where these laws need to be carefully thought out. If you just say you can only participate in a sport in which your birth certificate is recognized or whatever, you're missing a big part of the picture, a one-way street. If you are born female, no one seems to have a problem if you compete against males. But if you are born male, this is where people bring up issues because there are advantages. Prenatal testosterone. I've interviewed scientists about this, and it is a real issue. It is not something you can just transition away from. There is a very prominent transgender athlete who's actually a researcher, I think in the Pacific Northwest, who did a study that found prenatal testosterone, meaning the baby in the womb receiving more testosterone, gets an advantage, perhaps due to what's called fast twitch muscle. These are muscle fibers that can release large amounts of energy very quickly. My understanding is that they're good for big bursts of strength, and then slow twitch is better for endurance. But if you're competing in sports, you're often going to be using high burst energy, at least many of these sports. So it's very difficult to figure out how to actually solve this problem. Now, I've had a lot of leftists say to me, there you go, Tim. That argument in and of itself suggests that it's all arbitrary and we should just decide who can compete on whatever they want. Yeah, okay. Then we're going to refine the rules, and I'm fine with that. But there are certain things that need to be talked about. In the instance of Mac Beggs, this is a biological female who is transitioning to a man, which is, as they say, a social construct. And there's a distinction here that we should talk about, first and foremost. They say that, first, let me just stress this point that I'm personally confused about. How is it that you say someone is transitioning based on the clothing they wear, right? That they say anybody can wear any clothing. There are biological males who are not trans who wear dresses and put on makeup, and they say they're challenging the gender binary, but they consider themselves to be men because clothing is a social construct. But there are many people who simply by nature of changing their clothing or choosing different colors claim to be male or female. The components of one of the core reasons why we label people based on male or female is specifically because of biological differences. Men tend to have more muscle mass, Men tend to be taller. The average male is a few inches taller than the average female. Because of this, we have gender segregation. You want to argue against it? I'm all for it. The argument, I'm saying, by all means, have the discussion. But we need to talk about something else. Now, this one's admittedly a little personal. As many of you know, I've been skateboarding for several decades. I have some friends who are prominent female pro skateboarders. And a lot of people watching this show, maybe you watching this, are prominent skateboarders, perhaps even some pros, because I know you guys message me and I talk to them about certain things all the time. So this one, I was actually contemplating, whether I should even get into this, but I'm going to because we need to have this conversation. I am in no way seeking to disparage Leo Baker in any way. In fact, I've skated with Leo in the past, years and years and years ago, at a few different parks. I know many people who know Leo, and I think Leo Baker is seriously an amazing skateboarder. However, there are some things that I think need to be brought up because if we're trying to be fair, and we want to say that biological males, if you transition, can compete against biological females, then we need to address people who are trans, either non-binary or male, who still choose to compete against biological females. The issue I take with this is if you want to be fair and have a distinct bracket between men and women, be it social construct or otherwise, it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, that someone who is born male and transitions will compete against females, and that someone who is born female and transitions will still compete against females. The same is true for Mac Beggs. I believe Mac Beggs should have been allowed and should be allowed to compete against biological males. Or perhaps there's a different discussion to be had there. But like I said, it's not like you can just say treat everyone identically because males and females are different. I want to point something out. This is an article from popsugar.com. And we have this segment here that, let me just read a little bit. Leo Baker is a seven-time X Games medalist, the 5th-ranked street skateboarder in the world, among women, not men. I am not trying to be disparaging in any way. That's just not the 5th-ranked street skateboarder in the world. If we were going to make a non-binary bracket, Leo Baker would probably be, I'm not, again, in the bottom hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe bottom thousands. Not trying to be disparaging. This is just true. They say, and became one of the youngest skaters ever to medal at the X Games in 2006 against women. But dominating the women's division for years, you see, made Baker's journey to embracing themselves as a non-binary person and athlete difficult. Just being non-binary in competition and in sports is a really large thing to pick apart, they told Pop Sugar. Baker, now 28, says their success in the women's category played a role in suppressing their true gender identity. Exploring their masculinity wasn't something they began to do until around 18 or 19 years old. There wasn't anything to think about, Baker said. I was successful. I was out following my dreams, and that was that. Baker was encouraged by sponsors to dress feminine, and they complied. But looking back, they say it came at a cost. Now this, on Instagram, Leo Baker says pronouns are he and they, I believe. So I think he is appropriate. I just want to point out this is grammatically confusing. When you include that, when you include a singular and a plural in the same sentence, again, I'm just trying to point out my difficulty with the language and something people should clear up. When you say Baker was encouraged by sponsors to dress feminine and they complied, it's a confusing sentence. Just say he complied. Looking back, he said it came at a cost. There's this obsession with using they when they don't need to, and Baker on Instagram says he. Here's a quote. My career didn't really allow for that exploration, so I kind of just tabled it for a really long time until it got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. And so that was an 8-year process of living a fragmented life. It became public knowledge that Baker was non-binary when they were featured in the music video for Miley Cyrus's Mother-Daughter in July of 2019. Remember that date. In the video, around the 1:30 mark, you'll see the camera pan over Baker with they and them written on their white shirt. In a way, it was really natural for me. It just made sense because of the vibe of the video, they said. I obviously knew I was trans when I was 20. They went on to explain. I would say if I wasn't in the public eye and I wasn't skating in competitions or was just a regular teenager, I think I probably would have figured it out a lot sooner. The skate industry at large, I feel a lot of resistance from. They believe that when they first started to present as masculine, they were judged unfairly in competitions based on the way they looked. Obviously, standing in my power and sticking to who I am and being authentic really spoke volumes more than just winning a competition, because I think it's paying off now. What would it be like if I was living as Lacey Baker? There's nothing there. It's just hollow. He goes on to mention that, or they, had a nickname Lee from 2013. Okay, with respect, if you knew that you were trans when you were in 20, and I mean this genuinely, I am not trying to be disrespectful. I'm trying to be very, very careful here. I'd like to point out that we can pull up from November 15th, 2019, women's street competition in which Leo Baker, 20th place, global ranking 58. Okay, so that's November 19th. If it was public to the world that Leo was trans in July 2019 and that Leo knew he was trans at 20, why still compete in the women's category? Why is it that we have Mac bags wanting to compete against males? Why is it that we have trans women wanting to compete in the women's division, yet when we have a very prominent trans individual who was born female, they remain in the women's division? This is a double standard that needs to be talked about, especially in the context of these laws, because I will stress, it makes no sense for someone who is born female and transitions to stay in the women's division if you are arguing that trans women should be competing against women. You see my point? We can't just put every single person in the women's category unless we have like one category, like two categories of just no gender requirements. And in one category, one's literally meritocracy and one's just whatever you want it to be. I don't understand. Here we have more. In October 20th, 2019, U.S. skateboarding national champions, women's street, Leo Baker competing against women, 4th place. And then there's a few more. We have this one, 32nd place. And this one is September 19th, 2019. If Leo is saying they knew they were trans since they were 20 years old and had a nickname from 2013. Why still compete against women? Is there something barring Leo from competing in the men's skateboarding division, or should there be a non-binary division? I don't know. My point is this: we have a large group of Democrats screaming and slamming the table, saying it is unfair to ban biological males from women's categories, but they're not screaming when you have trans people who are female who are transitioning or trans competing against females. Well, actually, I guess in the case of Mac Beggs, it was because they wanted something. Mac Beggs wanted to compete against biological males, and they said no. The argument is broken. It is not a complete conversation. That's kind of the point. Now, with respect to Leo Baker, there are these claims that pop up that I think are inappropriate. They're taking away any concept of actual biological ability. It's a fact. When Pop Sugar opens with 5th ranked street skateboarder in the world, under what ranking system? If I were to name the top skateboarders in the world, let me see. Nyjah Houston would probably be number 1, maybe rivaled by we got Yuto Horigome and Aurelian Gerard, Chris Joslin. And Paul Rodriguez might be a little bit older. There's top 4. But I can tell you this. You look at the top rankings and there's 12 or 15 guys that set themselves apart from everyone else in the world. Plus you've got vert skaters and stuff like that. When you blanket statement and remove women's from the statement, it changes everything. So I'll put it like this. Leo's rad. Cool person. Wish the best for them and all their great success. But I'm wondering why it is that we don't have any kind of calm, rational, and legitimate conversation around how to solve for whatever this is. If you have people saying Mac Beggs should be, like these are Democrats, Mac Beggs should be competing against males, not females. I don't understand why there's no call for the same thing for Leo. Now, to be fair, and absolutely, with respect, Leo has not competed, at least according to the Border.com listings, has not competed since November 15th, 2019. Many other women have competed in the women's division. So it may just be that, Leo had a coming to of being like, this is who I am, and I'm finally now aware of it, and I'm going to be stepping out and not competing against women because it's not appropriate. But you look at that interview, and Leo says that they knew they were trans when they were 20, had a nickname in 2013. It sounds to me like there's a very serious double standard, and we need to talk about this. If Ohio, Florida, Arkansas, West Virginia, Montana are going to be passing these laws that are specifically saying males can't compete against females, well, then we need to have a discussion about what it means for females to compete against males. And therein lies, I guess, the obvious truth. Biological males outcompete biological females in almost every single major sport. I say almost because I'm not an absolutist. I don't have all of every sport. There could be some, something specific that women are doing better. There's the legend of the Soviet female snipers. They had an easier time of laying still for long periods of time, and maybe that's true. I'm not an expert on this. I'm not an expert on a lot of the stuff, but I can point out one very simple bit of common sense. There is no rule barring females from competing in the NBA, the MLB, or otherwise, but they're not in these leagues. Females have tried out for the NFL as kickers, and they've come up short. But it's possible we could see a female kicker soon. It doesn't make sense, okay? And we need it to make sense so we know what the rules are. Otherwise, right now, it seems to me that there are people. I was reading about Mac Beggs wanting to live their true self, and they have this documentary where they're talking about these trans women runners, running track in Connecticut. There's a lawsuit over this. And they say they wanted to be their true selves. And I'm like, Tim Pool, actually pretty good at skateboarding. I've been rollerblading a bit more recently because I'm just chilling out. And man, skateboarding's got real corporate in the Olympics and everything's kind of got me down a little bit. But I'm pretty good at skateboarding. I had some light sponsorships when I was younger. I can do a bunch of really crazy flip tricks. I'm 35. I'm out of my prime. Not super interested in being the best. Never was. I was never built for being the best skateboarder in the world. I was never driven to be the best skateboarder in the world. And quite honestly, did not have the physical capabilities to be the best skateboarder in the world. And I skated to the best of my abilities. I still do. I learn new tricks every single day, and I have fun. I'm not going to demand that my identity as my true self, this great skateboarder, be recognized by anyone else. It's not reality. Some people are born, like Michael Phelps, with specific physical traits that just, congratulations, that's what you are. But people have different bodies. Some people are tall, some people are short. And that means as much as you want to be Michael Phelps, you might not be. Now look at Muggsy Bogues. That dude was amazing. Dude, what was he like? He was like 5'5" or like 5'3" or something. He could 360 dunk because that dude said, I'm going to take it. He says, if I want it, I will see it. And it will make it mine. And he is one of the greatest basketball players of all time, especially considering that he didn't have the height advantages of many other players. He proved you can just do it. But think about the hard work that he put in, the dedication, the determination. What we're talking about now is the elimination of that and just making sports more about feel good. Anybody for any reason wants to join can join, in which case I think the end result should be like an open league of anybody can compete. You can have bionics, you can take drugs, you can take hormones, you can do whatever you want. I think that's the end result. And just people pushing. I mean, I genuinely think it makes sense. You get a human being, large bionic arms, and if they can throw a basketball or swing a hammer and throw it farther than someone else, well, there we go. So long as it's attached to a human brain that's computing, I suppose that's where we're going. Eventually, I guess it'll just be computers and robots competing against each other. But if we're really coming to this place now where we can say that someone who was born male, who isn't good enough to be in the top leagues, could just compete against females, and that someone born female who is one of the best females but decides to transition and be trans should still compete against females, clearly something isn't making sense for what the women's division is supposed to be, right? Should someone who is not a woman compete against women? And if you believe trans women are women, then I have a question about Leo Baker competing against women. And to be fair, again, this may just be why Leo Baker hasn't competed since November of 2019. So I know that I often try to avoid bringing up people's names specifically in certain stories unless they're of a particular status. And, to the best of my ability, I'm being respectful, but please, let's address these questions. Otherwise, it's just going to be more and more contentious. No one's going to know what the rules are. Maybe these arguments are happening. I mean, like maybe the lawsuits and these battles in politics are the arguments that will eventually hammer out the details and we'll figure it out. Until then, here are some issues I think need to be addressed, and I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.